morning from Bangkok. Welcome to all our viewers watching us live on SPAFA's Facebook and on Zoom. Be sure to let us know which part of the world you are joining us from by leaving a comment on Facebook. Thank you for joining the Southeast Asian Minister of Education Organization, Regional Center for Archaeology and Fine Arts, or SPAFA, in today's our SPAFA session, titled New Normals Throughout History, Urban Society Adaptation to Crisis. I am Ayutthaya, SPAFA's specialist in cultural heritage conservation and today's session moderator. During the session, we welcome questions for our speakers, which we will try to get to during the Q&A portion. We will be choosing one question at random from Facebook and one from Zoom to be the lucky winners for our new SPAFA bag. Here, this one, the white one, and this is the black one. The winners will be announced at the end of the session. So make sure you stay with us until the end of this session. Before I give the floor to our guest speakers, I would like to share our thoughts on this session. Now we are aware that our world is changing due to COVID-19 outbreak. While the pandemic still continues and no one knows how this biological disaster will end. As we've seen various protective measures such as physical distancing, rearranging the designs and facilities in public spaces, or changing social practices and etc. have been implemented so as to mitigate the spreading of the virus and to reduce the impacts from this disease. Also, it has been debatable whether these changes will be temporary or will become the new social orders or normals that bring new ways of life to mankind in the future, in the near future. Therefore, this from SPAFA's fields of expertise, we think it will be worth to look back at our history. So today, many examples of human adaptations to several kinds of disaster will be shared. From today, our speakers may share some examples from 3 cities, Ayutthaya, London, and Manila. We will start from the first guest speaker, Siripoj Laomanacharoen, and author of the book Black Death from China to Siam or Today Thailand. Then followed by Sasathorn Chalermpaen, a Thai archaeologist who works for Museum of London Archaeology or MOLA, and who got up at 3 a.m. London time today to be with us. And the last but not least, Tina Paterno, the president of ICOMOS Philippines, who will share how the San Sebastian Basilica can stand for the earthquake hundreds of years after its construction was failed to complete several times. So we, ladies and gentlemen, please join me now in welcoming our guest speaker, Siripoj, who's the first speakers. Actually, unfortunately, he cannot be with us in person nowadays. But we have his video recorded previously for his research. Let's start from him first.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Siripoj Laomanacharoen. I used to be a lecturer at the Faculty of Archaeology, Siripoj University in Bangkok, Thailand for 8 years. But today, I am an independent researcher. And my latest research has published in the early April this year in the midst of the city lockdown due to COVID-19 situation. This title is Back Then. Since the length of King Lama II to King Lama III of Bangkok period, around 200 years ago, There were cholera pandemic in the world, included Thailand. As too many deaths were happened from this outbreak, they had changes the perception of the local Thai toward the word ha from its archaic meaning plague to the new meaning cholera. That would cause the translation of the word ha in ancient Thai document became completely interpreted as cholera, which is not supported too. The point that I am particularly interested in studying is the legend of King Uythong, who was a legendary king that we do not know if he really exists or not. And of course, the legend of King Uythong is related to the word ha. Like many others, this legend began with once upon a time. Alright, I will start telling the legend of King Uythong to you first. Once upon a time, King Uythong has evacuated from the spread of ha, which has severely spread on some area. It is depending on who telling the story and where they want King Uythong to come from. But that is not an important point as the part when the king has migrated then built Ayutthaya to its glory. Ayutthaya is one of the most important centers of Thai history and Thai identity. In the official history of Thailand, Ayutthaya has collapsed as the result of the invasions of Angwa army. Angwa troops were driven out later. Then Thai people built the new city, namely Thonburi and Bangkok, respectively. Therefore, the legend of King Uythong is very important in Thai history because he was the one who built Ayutthaya. Even though the story of King Uythong is just a legend, not found in official documents such as chronicle, but it is certain that many people often refer the legendary King Uythong as Somdet Pha Ramathibadi I, who was the first king of Ayutthaya as claimed by all Ayutthaya chronicles. This made the revision and publishing of all Ayutthaya chronicles always puts the name Uythong within the parentheses after the name of King Somdet Pha Ramathibadi I. Of course, the ha that was spread so severely that King Uythong has evacuated. It has been described as cholera because of the misunderstanding of the meaning of the word that changes in Bangkok period. But there is yet another piece of evidence that the cholera epidemic began in Ayutthaya around 660 years ago. That is the story of some elite in Ayutthaya called Chao Keo Chao Thai, which is written in chronicles stating that his death was from cholera. But all the chronicles that talk about this was written in the Thonburi and Bangkok periods. Why all the chronicles written in Ayutthaya periods were not mentioned about this case at all? So this is the interpretation of the writer, who are talking about the things that happened 400 years before their own periods as well. And in fact, the death of Chao Keo Chao Thai may not have anything to do with the pandemic that King Uythong has escaped at all. In the original sense, the word ha means large amount. For example, phon tok ha yai means raining heavily. So the word ha, when used in the sense related to disease, it refers to epidemic that has caused many deaths, not specific to what disease is. Therefore, legend of King Uythong evacuation of the disease does not say that disease he expected, but it only tells us that epidemic that has killed many people. And therefore again, to understand that which disease has occurred in day of King Uythong, requires more environmental evidence than the reference of chronicles and the legend of this king. The interesting point is if we agree with the assumption that legendary King Wutong is the same person as Somdet Paramathipadi I in Ayutthaya Chronicle, the year that King Wutong escaped from the plague to build Ayutthaya will coincide with 1350, which was the period of the Black Death pandemic throughout the world. And there are numbers of people who have died in number that has never happened before. The severity of this outbreak at that time made the disease known as Black Death, and it also made the English word plague, in addition to translating plague. It can specifically mean Black Death too. And it is the vital testimony of the atrocity that occurred because of the plague at that time. The first place where the Black Death epidemic occurred during that time was in Hebei province in China in 1331. It was reported that 9 out of 10 people were died as the result of the plague epidemic. That time coincided with the Yuan dynasty that the Mongol took over the Chinese. Therefore, when the epidemic occurred among the Chinese people, without knowing why and preventable and incurable, the Mongols simply shut down the city and let the people die until the disease stops spreading, and then they opened up the city. But the Mongols were still unable to end the plague at the time. Worse than that is during this time, Mongol armies are invading Europe, and it is evident in the letter by Gabriele de Mussi, a lawyer from Genoa, Italy, written in 1348, stating that while the Mongols were at war in Kafka in Ukraine today, they have thrown the dead body of the plague into the city and the sea adjacent to the city until the crops pile up right a mountain. Of course, this action will lead to more disease outbreaks. However, the main part that led the Black Death epidemic spread throughout the world at the time, arising from the world trade route by sea, it was recorded that the Black Death plagued Messina on the Sicily island since 1347, and then it did not take long for an epidemic deep into the mainland Italy and enter Paris and London in the year 1348. Many records ever showing that there were people dying in the outbreaks of Black Death in Europe that time. One of an interesting evidence suggests that the Black Death came to Europe with the ship is the iron loops that was used in the ports of Italy during the epidemic wars. When the ship was docked, the boatmen will be quarantined on the ship and forbidden to land for 40 days. Just like a quarantine in the current COVID-19 situation. And if those boatmen weren't dead, first, they could go ashore. So this island loop made the word quaranta, translated 40 in Italian, to become quarantine in English until now. Ayutthaya itself is a port city. Ships from China before reaching Italy must pass to Southeast Asia before going to India and other places respectively. So the Black Death must have been visited in the various parts of the legend, which should include Ayutthaya too. The legend of King Wutong evacuated from the plague to build Ayutthaya is an important trace of this, because there is a period of time that overlaps significantly. But the legend of King Wutong was not the only trace that shows traces of Black Death in Thailand during that time. in an old book called Nakhon Si Thammarat Legend, which is about the history of Nakhon Si Thammarat, the city located on the Malay Peninsula in southern Thailand today. Of course, Nakhon Si Thammarat is an important port city since ancient time. It is important that this book talks about the delimitation of the King Utong and Phaya Si Thammasokaraj. That the land of King Utong was to the north of the pillar, while the land of Phaya Si Thammasokaraj is to the south of the same pillar. The same legend is mentioned 7 years later. Phaya Si Thammasokaraj died. His brother Lord Jantalapanu has ascended the throne in Nakhon Si Thammarat instead. Then there was an outbreak that caused the death of the entire city until the city was abandoned. King Jantalapanu took his family to escape the plague on the ship, but the whole family died in the end because of the epidemic anyway. Both of the legend of King Utong and the legend of Nakhon Si Thammarat, it shows the traces of the epidemic during the overlap between King Utong and King Jantalapanu. This is the same time that the Baghdad spread in various port cities, allow every part of the world. That King Utong evacuated to build Ayutthaya then should mean Baghdad more than any other disease. For the region of King Utong escaping the disease and build Ayutthaya, what happened new? Aside from Ayutthaya are changes that differ from the previous period. The key point is Ranget, which is the original key Ranget used in Ayutthaya area and perimeter. That is Khmer Ranget. After the Baghdad time, this Ranget has gradually degraded, while Thai Ranget has become an important Ranget instead. Important traces can be seen from the fact that the word is used among the Ayutthaya royal family, which is called the royal word. The royal words are full of Khmer language alongside words in Pali and Sanskrit, but there is almost no Thai language. Royal words are not used among the general public. This shows signs of the importance of Khmer language in this area before the time of Baghdad. Similar events happened in the British Isles as well. Before the Baghdad plague, the 14th century, the main language among the English elite was French. Because of the Norman victory that took over England since 1066. But after the outbreak of the Baghdad, causing the death of 30% of people of England, especially among the elites that has access to resources that are imported from abroad, which came on the ship. The lower class English speaker has an increased importance. Therefore, English became the essential language until today. In the case of Ayutthaya, it is not only the Thai language that has come up significantly. Various cultures that come with the Thai language, for example, a type of poem called Krong, which is related to the group of people using the Thai language, has replaced the Gap that was originally used in Khmer royal court. The Ramayana masquerade play called Khon in the royal court. The accent is used in Thai speaking, especially the Suphanburi accent, and including the decline of the stupa, which gradually influences the Khmer, changed to the bell-shaped stupa instead. So, the Thainess in Ayutthaya is the new normal that arose after the Baghdad pandemic. There is an important test in the legend of King Utong who escaped to build Ayutthaya to its glory. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Siripoj. Actually, I just got a news from our speaker Siripoj that he got accident this morning. So hopefully he can join with us before the end of this session. But anyway, it's quite interesting to see how the pandemic in the history in the past of our not only Ayutthaya but our made any emerging cultures in the history that still lasts until today's. So I don't think we have any question for his presentation. Then we will go to the next presentation from Sasathorn Chalermpaen. Sasathorn, are you ready? Okay, so Sasathorn, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone. Hello everyone. My name is Sasathorn Chalermpaen. I am a Thai archaeologist who graduated and have my early stage of career in Thailand, and later I moved to United Kingdom, and I have worked as an archaeologist here for 16 years. Very nice to meet you all. Today, of course, I'm talking about Black Death. As is mentioned before by Mr. Laomanacharoen earlier, the Black Death is believed to have originated in the Central Asia and has been destructing the world for so long, and especially the worst one is in during 1345 to 1351 that would destroy half of the world population by that time. Today I'm going to talk to you about the Great Plague of 1665 and 1666 in London. We call the Great Plague. So let me share with you my presentation. Could I please share the screen because it's being disabled at the moment.
Okay, we will do it for you.
Okay.
Which one? Shall we start from this one? Okay.
Yeah, this is the, okay, I'm supposed to move the next page now. Can I move to the next page? The next page, please.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's this origin of the plague that had been mentioned before that is happened, is traced back to Central Asia near Kyrgyzstan area. And then the next one, please. Can I move to the next one, please? Okay. So the plague that have destructed London in 1665 and 66, mainly you will see that from the picture that you see now, the blue line is the outline of the London city wall and the suburb area, which have been marked and separate in parish area. In the picture, the yellow dots are the two worst area that was hit by plagues, and especially the one in the middle on the top is St. Giles in the Field, where the first case was reported in May 1665. And then another one is St. Dunstan on the west. So it's been reported that the worst hit of the plague is destructed the poorer area in London, which is outside the city wall first, and then it's spreaded around, even coming to the inside the city wall as well. But nobody can explain the pattern of it, how it's jumped from place to place and spread so fast. Next picture, please. The thing is, like, by the time that London in 1660 is so overcrowded because there's so many poor people from the countryside, also the people who ran away from persecution in France, or people who try to look for something to make a living of themselves from other country like Ireland, or even some other country like Holland as well. They are just cramped and crowded to live in England. And you can see there are so many parish like that. By that time, everything will be separate in the area of governing will be separate by parish, because majority of people were Christian, and each parish will have church which is in charge of looking after people. Of course, outside the London Wall are more poor people. And if you see the red dot, the very small red dot at the inside the wall area next to number 61, and that is the point where London Fire has started in September 1666. Next picture, please. Okay. The plague was spread so fast as it began. So what did people respond? How did people respond to it? Of course, the first thing that they did is fled. The rich people who could afford to flee the city for country homes or other area outside London, they would do so much, and then including the numbers of most doctors and merchants. Even King Charles II himself and his court are also fled to Oxford, and later the Parliament also followed King Charles as well into Oxford. The next thing that have done is King Charles had produced orders. He has issued order to prevent the prevention of the plague. Then the Lord Mayor and aldermen remained in London to reinforce his order and try to stop the spread of the plague. Next thing that have to do is isolation and lockdown. Quarantineship from all courts would be held outside London for 40 days. They're not going anywhere until that 40 days has passed. Next thing is any form of gathering and social events were forbidden, which include the closing down of public houses. All trade with London was stopped. Nobody was allowed to leave or enter a town without certificate of health, which means that poor people had to remain in London with people who's already infected, and the rat that carry out the plague, but which by that time nobody didn't realize that the rat is the cause of the spreading of the pandemic. Next is shutting up or lock up. By that the language that they used by that time is called shut up or shutting up. Those who were found to be infected were locked up in their homes with the rest of their family members, both healthy and unhealthy together, were locked up together. So relating to the rapid death for everyone in the whole family. So you can guess what happened. Next is separating plague-infected dead bodies from the others. The mass grave was used later at the height of the plague heat. It was using to bury infected bodies because of the number of deaths was so overwhelming. The London ran out of space, ran out of time, and ran out of labor to do the job. Even the grave digger themselves, some of them would die from the plague itself. The next thing that they've done is create the new job for people in London. The new job for people. London economy was in crisis. Many people lost their jobs, became desperate to do anything for the living. However, there were high demand on new roles. People were hired as watchmen. The job of watchman is to lock and keep guard over houses of infected people, which led to a new jobs being created during the period. For example, the searchers who would look for the dead body and from time to time will have to enter those locked up houses to check that the residents inside have died yet or not. They then came out to report. Another job is people who would take the dead bodies, the dead body out of the house during the night. They will even have carts. In this picture, you far away, you can see the guys with the cart that carry out the dead bodies inside, and there will be people shout out at night time, say, "Bring out your dead." It means bring out the dead body inside your house. So we are going to collect them and put them in the plague pit. That's really sad story. Mourners and more grave diggers were also needed, and all of these jobs were performed by very, very poor people because they were desperate to make money for the living, and they have mouths to feed at home, because this job is so exposed to them, to the disease, and really, really dangerous. Rich people will want to take it. Another thing that they would do is pest house, setting up this pest house to quarantine people who already affected with plague. People had choice to be locked up with their family or have the choice to stay in the pest house. However, in London, it's so rare to have pest house. There was 5 pest houses dedicated to be built for London infected people. However, in the reality, there were only 2 pest houses was erected. One in Golden Square, Soho, London, and another one in Marylebone. The other 3 was on the project but never built. It was a incredibly sad story that everyone ever heard. What happened in the plague pest house is not very, very pleasant. However, the next thing that they do is eliminate possible source of disease. By over 100,000 cats and dogs were slaughtered as they were mistakenly that to be carrying out the disease. However, this does not stop the spread of the disease at all. Unfortunately, these dogs and cats were like street dogs, and some of them belong to poorer family. Another form of doing some kind of eliminate the disease that they believe is just using vinegar to try to sanitize money. They will put some vinegar into the jar when someone want to handle money or any item to each other. They will put into the jar of vinegar first before they pick it up and being used again. Even the letter will be opened over them boiling vinegars. So they believe the vinegar is one of the form of sanitizing all the disease. There's the order that every houses have to be kept clean, including area on the street. And some people would believe that the disease was airborne, so they will cover up the nose. In September 1665, King Charles has ordered fumigation technique. On the picture that you can see, like this look like a bonfire. This kind of bonfire will have the mixture of salt, pepper, brimstone, and amber together to create a very strong aromatic scent. And believe that these kind of strong scents had chased the rat away, and that reduced the number of the people die for 3 days. But these kind of fumigation have been put on the street in London for 3 days, and people were happy with the result. However, on the 4th day, the rains has came and has extinguished all these fight, and then the very next night 4,000 people has died from the plague. Unbelievable. You can see like all these attempts to limit the spread of plagues, it went in vain, because or some of them would work by chance, but most of the technique were useless because of they didn't really have knowledge about how the plague was spread. Can I have the next picture, please? There was no real knowledge about how the plague was spread. So even the royal physician has no real idea about how to cure the plague. Instead of provide something, they have issues made the strange remedies which would be completely ineffective, such as like some kind of chewing the tobacco, and they believe that chewing the tobacco or smoking would prevent the plague. Even children were encouraged to smoke because they believe that it's airborne and it could kill the disease. And even some kind of brew mixture of alcohol and opium would be suggested by the royal physicians. It wasn't until the 19th century, like 1896, that when people found out that this kind of Black Death was spread by the flea that live on the rat, and when the rat dies, these kind of flea can live in any kind of surfaces. And London by that time was so filthy, really dirty. Sanitation was really hard to keep up because it was so overcrowded, so many people. And those kind of flea can live in everywhere and can be transported from cloth to cloth, like some kind of like even some kind of damp cloth, your clothing, people clothing, because like if the rat dies, those flea can feed it on human also. Once it bite from the bite marks, it can release in the flea saliva. It's created bacteria that will once go into the bite mark, that person will be infected immediately. So nobody have that idea before at all until 200 years, over 200 years later. So it's almost like, it's like they don't know anything about it. And everything that they try to do, it just went in vain. Like block your nose doesn't really help. And then like shut up people together in the house, lock them up. It doesn't really help at all. It actually created more dead people. And because of this global trading that is happening in the land and the sea, like Silk Road and seaport and sea route of trading that people used by that time, and even 4th century before, is the main thing that make the Black Death has spread very, very quick, incredibly quick, and go around the world. In the photo that you see, this is the order of King Charles that King Charles has produced in order to prevent and get rid of the plague. Okay, can I have next picture, please? So that's the picture of the peak. That's the graph to show the peak of the mortality. The highest of the mortality was reached about almost 7,000. It's all over 7,000 people in 1 week in September, because that year it was incredibly hot. And then the reason that it came down, nobody knows. People believe that it's because of the cold has set, the winter's coming, and then since the cold has came, maybe it's make the fleas less active. I don't know. Nobody knows really until it's fading away really rapidly from December, from October, November, December. There's still some people who die. However, it's much less than the month of September until January. January is like incredibly low compared with what happened within few months before. Then in February, King Charles and his court had came back to London, which is a sign of relief, and people's life came back to the same again. So there was nothing can say that the remedies have that been produced is not cure anything at all. So I don't really believe that within a matter of a few months, people have time to react or do much at all. They didn't. It just like almost went in vain, everything that they do. However, that will be something that could affect the present situation nowadays. For example, the certificate of people who's not by the king's order, people were not allowed. Can I have the next picture as well? People were not allowed to leave any town or enter any town without a certificate of health. You can see this on this picture. There's another plague photos, how people produce the mass grave because it was so overwhelming. They don't have time, they don't have space, and they don't have labor. Next picture, please. So this is another picture of Great Plague hit in Old Gate. Nobody was allowed to come back again. Nobody was allowed to leave the city or enter any city without a certificate of health. So it could be the form of nowadays we need to use in many many kind of cases. For example, job application to prove that you are fit to work. And by slaughtering the cats and dogs so much on the street, they also were not allowed to run up and down the street anymore. May result of nowadays that there weren't any stray cats and dogs on the street in London, and that is affected to the rest of UK as well. United Kingdom, the plague has killed so many people who are working populations, leading to the rise on demand of labor at the same time. However, the price of land in the city was dropped hugely. The wealthy family began to claim more spaces in the city. Even after the plague, people continue to buy land and move there. In the 18th century, a large amount of land in London was bought for property development. You can see in the 18th century map later. The plague still exists today, with people still being infected all over the world. However, we understand far more about plague and how to prevent and exterminate the disease carrier, as well as using antibiotics on infected patients, which reduce the death rate and stop the plague spreading significantly. Nowadays, the city still continue to grow after the plague. There are still so many plague pits which have not been discovered in London, and nobody knows exactly how many there are and where they are all located. The location of some was recorded. However, the only way to know where all of them would be to perform an archaeological excavation and find them. Some known plague remains are found in many parts of London, some known by existing recording sources, and some through excavation. For example, Broadgate train station, King's Cross train station, Aldgate underground station. When they were excavated, we have found quite a few great plagues victims' bodies in there. And the reason that why London underground train map was so not straight and zigzagging, because when they were excavating, they tried to avoid the plague pit. Okay, next picture, please. See, this is the example of the development of the underground station, Aldgate Station, which with the excavation before rebuilding the building, we found a lot of plague pits, and they are victims from the Great Plague in 1665 and 1666. The City of London has always had land development, and the price of land has always been high, as London is constantly developing. Archaeologists are required to excavate area of archaeological interest before land development, and therefore many more plague pits and remains from the Great Plague are still waiting to be discovered. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Sasapan. I also would like to thank your colleagues who are the contributors for your presentations that you shown at the last page of your PowerPoint presentation. So it's quite interesting to see how plague developed in London in 17th centuries and make the city change and shaped as it is nowadays. I have a question. It's just only one question, I think, so we can have more time for Tina. As you have experience in doing archaeology in London, and you also mentioned that some of your project you had to excavate the area which near the plague pit. So and you also said you found that the skeletons or the dead bodies die from plague. How do you know the cause of death when you review the pit? Do you have any? Yeah. Can you explain?
The first thing the first form of the suspicious plague pit is just like it's just one big pit and just dump many people together, head toe. It's just like Asian people put fish in the tray. To be honest, it's because like I normally would excavate in the Christian burial ground as well. Like the early stage of plague, people still have time because there's not many people die yet, so they still have time to be careful about how they bury people. So they still bury them in the traditional Christian style, single person in a coffin, blah blah. But when the peak of the plague start in August, September, and October, it's in 1665. There was no time. People just fall like the leaves. Even the songs "Ring O Ring O Rose" that is kids nursery rhyme, and the end of the song said that, and we all fall dead. And that how people feel by that time that this disease was incurable. So people fall dead really quickly. There's no time, no space, not enough soil to cover individual person. Like some of the night was 4,000 people die in one night, 1 week. Could be over 7,000 people, and they will record that some pit was just dug up and buried at least 500 bodies in it. So when I excavated, once that I was excavated the site called Red Cross Bone in Southern Northern Bridge, and that was one of the sites that believed to be a Great Plague because they believed that they died from plague, but later it wasn't from the Great Plague, but it's in much later. The state of the body will be just like skeleton. There's no soil. There was just skeleton on top of skeleton with hardly any soil. I never have to dig. I just use brush.
Yeah.
It was just so incredibly easy to dig. However, when you think of it, it was really sad at the same time. They don't have time to chuck the body in. Of course, the people of the family member will never know who go where, and they lose the record of the pit as well. There will be some area that won't record, especially like Golden Square in Soho and Marylebone, and next to the Pest House. Of course, it's so obvious that in Pest House people wanna die, so they're gonna bury there. However, there's so many plague pits that nobody knows. They lose mark people who made it die from the plague themselves. So the only way to know is excavate. So the nature of it, just like chuck the body together. You know, if they chuck the body together, that's first thing you have to think about. That's the plague pit.
Yeah.
Or could be like sometimes could be victim from war, but of course in UK it's a bit hard to find like that. If it's in this kind of case, you can guess from the environment as well, the finds you found, so you can guess that it's not as old as when they have the war massacre or something. So the victim of massacre that been buried in the same kind of, it will be buried in the same kind of style, maybe worse, because in plague pit they still humanely put them in the order, but in the massacre pit they will probably just chuck in and throw something in, because anyway, maybe I talk too much. I don't want to take too
No,
much
it's okay.
time.
But for my curiosity, so when you found the skeletons like that, what do you do next? Like you just reburial the pit once again, or it will be taken away to somewhere and kept there in a kind of storage or museum?
Unfortunately, the land in United Kingdom are so expensive, especially City of London. So there will be no preservation. They will be just dug up and take to the museum, processes, try to look for the cause of the death, and everyone will have numbered. So we know, and we record the order, where did we found, location, the state of how we found of each individuals, and we'll take to the processing area, and then we have osteologists to study deeper about them. What's is the sex, how the way they die, how rough age, and they will send the DNA example like from the tooth to the lab to check the evidence that when is it related to. I used to work on the site called Crossrail in Liverpool Street when they expand the train track, and we found a plague pit there, and it was suspected as 1665, 66, but it was about 40 years earlier. It would be 1625. So myself personally, I wasn't really working with found the plague pit that actually on 1665 at all. But I found one of them. I was working on one of the area called Charterhouse Square, which have like incredible amount of bones and human and adult and children were mixed up together. It was just a test pit. I wasn't really excavate the whole pit. It was just a test hole about this big. They used the machine to take the soil sample, and then it's pulled out. In that one single pull out, it was like collarbones of adults and the bit of little children mixed together. That was incredibly sad, and it just looked like a plague pit to me.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. We may come back to you once again if we have more questions. But Tina, before I give the floor to you, let me say hi to Siripoj, who now is here with us. Just to show your face, Siripoj, can you turn on your camera?
Hello.
Yeah. Hi. Good morning. So we hope you are fine from the accident this morning. We already showed your presentation, and we will come back to you once again for the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Tina, now it's your floor.
Thank you.
I will change you to be a co-host.
I will share screen.
Okay, I think now you can share.
Okay. Can you see it?
You have to show, make a slideshow. Okay.
Okay, let me hide this. Okay, so maybe we change gears. Thank you, Sasathorn. I'm very glad that you're able to wake up very early in the morning, and for me to hear this presentation. I was brought back to the 1600s and living your story. So thank you. I learned so much. A bit about me. My name is Tina Paterno. I am a conservator for historic buildings, and I was trained in the West, and I worked in the West. I worked in New York for 10 years as a conservator, and then I moved back and worked on this building. So thank you to Simios Pafa for having me this morning, and to Ms. Ayutthaya, who is our director at ICOMOS International. I'm going to talk about recurring disasters and how our buildings adapted to these disasters. In particular, this one case study, San Sebastian Basilica. I was its executive director and one of its founders, and worked there for 8 years. I am now on sabbatical. So I'd like to run through how our buildings evolved as a result of colonization. We are a colony of Spain for 300 years, and in response to fire and earthquakes. So one thing you should know is that the entire Philippines sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. So over on the left in this box is the Philippine Islands. We experience roughly about 2,000 earthquakes a year, and thankfully we don't feel most of those. We feel about 10 to 12% of those earthquakes, and about 4 to 6 are earthquakes that damage some part of our islands. Let's go to our traditional architecture. So what was it like? Well, we lived in small huts made of wood and thatch. They were small clusters, about 30 to 100 families. And if you see here, they were raised on stilts away from the damp ground. And if there was a flood, it was fine. If there was an earthquake, then they just swayed. We never had monumental architecture because we never had an empire. We didn't have a king. So there was no system that could have produced such lasting architecture. We also never had a tradition of building in stone, except for one island up north, Thainess, which is actually closer to Taiwan, and it gets battered by storms, and they evolved their own unique architecture that was built with stone. But for the rest of the country, this is pretty much what it looked like. And so when the Spanish arrived in 1565, they stayed for about 300 years. This is what Manila and the rest of the country looked like. And when they decided to set up towns, usually centered around the church, they decided at first to build with indigenous materials. So they used wood and thatch. And this worked fine for a time. And even the cathedral was built of wood and thatch. As communities grew larger, the settlements grew denser. They were closer together. And then there was a fire that broke out in 1583, and the entire city, its homes, its cathedral were consumed in just a few hours. And so the Spanish decreed to build in stone. So they said this wooden thatch is not working for us, and they mandated for the city to be built only in stone. And this is the courtyard of a wealthy home. And this style is what you would have found in New Spain or Mexico. And it didn't survive very long, as you can imagine, because the earthquakes came. And if you notice, there are large openings, there were no buttresses, and there was a great earthquake in 1645. I'd like to read you a passage from it. The earthquake passed from north to south and then east to west with a rapid movement, and in that brief time, it flung to the ground the most beautiful and magnificent buildings in the city. The stone walls were shaken and bent like sheets of parchment or paper fluttered by the wind. This is from Philippine Ancestral Houses by Fernando Shalcita. And so the resulting architecture for houses is this kind of a hybrid. You have the first story built in stone, often with wooden structural posts. It's either stone or brick. And the second floor was of a lighter material, wood, which made it more pliable in an earthquake, but also lighter. And so you see these variations of different artistic expressions of the same form. What happened to our churches? Our churches evolved to become earthquake proof as well. The top two on the left are UNESCO World Heritage sites, and they're cited as earthquake proof Baroque. So our architecture morphed to become lower with wider walls. And if you notice, all of them have buttresses. So over here, here, and this is probably the most distinct expression of buttressing the lateral walls. This is Pawai Church. Also, the bell towers became lighter, smaller in area as you go up, typically. So in effort to prevent earthquakes, this is what many of our churches look like. And they evolved really out of the need to stand structurally. Let me show you how one other church took a different route. There's a great 3D model of the Basilica by SciArc. And I'm just gonna show you the church in 3D. So this is an all-metal basilica. It's the only all-metal building in the country. And it doesn't look like metal, does it? It was born in the Industrial Revolution. And it's actually church number 5 to be built on the same spot. There were 4 other churches on the same spot, but they were built of masonry. And they all fell because of earthquakes. So what you're looking at here, actually the church proper ends here, is over 1,500 tons of metal parts that are screwed and riveted together and painted over so that it looks like a regular masonry church. So let me now take you to the inside. Again, if you were to just look at it, you think A, it's in perfect condition, and B, it's probably made of stone. And that was its design intent. There are, for example, rivets up here that are disguised as flowers, and every inch of this was decoratively painted to look like stone. So let me take you to some of the decorative areas. So if you threw, let me show you on top, if you threw magnets on this, it would stick to the columns, the ceiling, the walls, the doors. And it's quite hard to fathom, but I hope that when you look at it and I point out areas of deterioration and damage, it will become a little more apparent. This, for example, is a metal panel, and here's where you have drip marks. So why metal? Well, being church number 5 and 4 other churches of masonry, its designer, Genaro Palacios, who was the director of public works of the colonial government of Spain at the time, was designing this building in the aftermath of one of Manila's worst earthquakes. This was the 1880 earthquake. And I guess you can imagine the pressure of A, the director of public works, B, he was a good friend of the owners of this building, the Augustinian Recollects, who asked for his help. And 3, he was designing a building that would withstand future earthquakes. instead of building with stone again, which was 4 times, they fell during earthquakes, and then people banded together and rebuilt their church 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. By the 4th time that the masonry church had fallen, Palacios said, I have an idea. There's a brand new material that's being used. The year was about 1880, and this was the height of the Industrial Revolution. And he said, there's a brand new material in the world. It's called steel. Let's use it, because this will enable us to build taller structures. Steel is a lot less brittle than stone, so it's lighter and you can go higher. So for example, maybe we can go out a bit. This basilica, a normal masonry church would only go about up to here, but this was able to go up to 3 times in height. So let's go back and let's see if I can do this. Okay, let me take you around also so you see the back. Sorry, this is very, very sensitive. Let me try and take you around to look at the back. So everything is decoratively painted. Even these doors that look like wood are just painted to look like wood. And let me take you up to the dome. Here. This is done by SciArc, which does 3D documentation, and this was a donated scan through ICOMOS. And I was on sabbatical at the time, and they really just wanted to do this building. So there's an incredible amount of artwork that's on here. So I hope you get a sense of this. There were 7 nationalities that constructed this church. Belgium, France, England. The stained glass is from Germany. And in fact, we find the works in the V&A Museum, Victoria and Albert in London, and in the Vatican Museum. So let me go back to So let me talk about the challenges in this project. We're looking at 2 components. One is the physical restoration of this building, and there are 3 phases: documentation and diagnosis and research. The second phase is designing repairs and upgrades, and the third phase is the construction. The second, which to me was actually much more challenging, was the sustainability phase, which had community development, awareness and education, developing new uses for the space, marketing, income generation by tours and merchandise, and fundraising. I'd like to add, so the Order of the Augustinian Recollects are very proud of this church, and of course, that would be obvious, no? One of the reasons spiritually it's also very important to them was the basilica was the historic shrine of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, who the Virgin has a very, very strong devotion in the Philippines. And the first icon arrived and lived first in San Sebastian. And so at the time, it became the national shrine to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. I'll just walk you through other parts of the church so you get a sense of the space. Maybe if you look at it, you'll say, it looks like it's in wonderful condition. Why is it being restored? Well, if you go up close enough, you'll see that almost every inch of this place is corroding to various degrees. What you're seeing now is actually relative to the rest of the spaces in good condition. How is it constructed? The steel was actually formed in Belgium in 2 different foundries. And this is a historic picture of the basilica being put together. So they constructed it in Belgium and shipped 1,500 tons of steel all the way to Manila on 9 steamships. Let me show you how it's actually constructed. You're looking at metal plates that are just formed into the desired shape and riveted, screwed, and bolted together. So for example, this column, this is how it's actually constructed. So it's hollow. And let me show you also, this is a section of the church. And these areas are all hollow. So in fact, if you knock on its walls, it sounds a bit like a drum. We've represented some of the leaks here. In fact, when it rained, we chased these leaks and we tracked over 300 leaks and then we stopped counting. The most challenging part of the technical work was finding what was going on inside our walls and inside our columns, because these are spaces that had never been seen before. As we look more closely at the building, it divulged a lot more mysteries that we needed to solve. What is happening? What is causing it? And what is the impact of this condition to the rest of the building? I won't go through the entire research, documentation, diagnostic, and testing phase, but just a visual representation of the work that was done. I'd also like to say here that preservation of buildings is a fairly young field in this country, and it was very difficult to find professionals who A, specialized in historic buildings, but B, had any background on working on an all-metal structure. Since this is the only one in the country, almost no one had any experience. I'd like to shout out here a thank you, a big thank you to our volunteers who saw us through the first phase, because we had just formed the foundation. We had no money. We were applying for grants. And we told as many people who we thought could really contribute to this project. And they came. They came to help us with various scopes of work. And this is not all of them, but these are the ones who really had long-term and significant contributions. We were dealing with people in 3 time zones, working on a volunteer basis, donating their time. So you can imagine how it was to negotiate schedules, negotiate deliverables in different time zones, and on a building that they had never seen. We worked through models and did it online. And eventually we got major funding from the US Department of State through the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation. I'll just briefly go through the process of documenting the conditions. Each one was assigned a symbol, and this all went into a drawing. So that part you just saw is this little square here. And we did this for all elevations that we could see. It's only when you take a step back that you can identify patterns in what's going on in the entire building, so you know exactly where to focus next. One of the largest technical challenges was seeing inside the walls and columns, as I'd explained. No? So a large part of our work was working up in the attic above this ceiling and dropping down a camera down into these columns, which extend about 2 meters below the floor. And it was a system that was rigged by an electronics engineer, God bless him, because GoPros just wouldn't give us the signal. So this is, you're now inside the column. This is a view from the top looking all the way down. And if you see, there's that white dot. I'm going to take you inside our column. This is one of the first ones we saw, and it was a great surprise when we got down because there was water. And if you look on all four sides, there were massive holes. This is a shot underwater, and the formations indicated that this water has been there for a really long time. It looks like the kind of crust that you see in a shipwreck. The next step was to understand, where is this water coming from? And when we tried to do a thorough diagnostic, we realized it's coming from everywhere. There's so many open joints. Things were coming apart on the outside and making its way in. The largest contributor, however, was a repair that they did in the 80s. So this is the exterior. And if you see this white thing here, this is cement wedged in a pinnacle valley. And I think the spirit of this, the spirit of this repair was to shed water, but it, in the long term, did the opposite because they used two incompatible materials. When we remove this concrete here, this is about 3 feet high, it exposed a hole in each side of the column in the exact imprint of the concrete. And when you look in floor plan at how many of them actually have water below, this became a structural issue. And I won't go through this, but we had a whole team and we're still working on it because we're trying to answer the question, what kind of repairs do we need to do and what exact materials? We find that in 1891, when it was constructed, it was actually constructed to be 20 times stronger than it needed to be to stand. So there were incredible redundancies in this building. However, over time and with all of these leaks, we don't really know what the resulting strength is because it's eaten away crucial parts of the structure. Some of that is being modeled right now, and we're working on repairs. It's going to, this is, we were also looking at the trompe-l'oeil and did conditions assessments and understood what kind of layers were on the paint. It's a tricky conservation problem because your canvas is corroding. And the paint that's on there isn't just aesthetic. It also has a service life. It's meant to protect the steel. Sorry, I'm going too deeply into the material. I'm gonna rush through. I know we're out of time. We also did a lot of emergency repairs for the largest leaks. And if you see here, we took out the flashing and there are massive holes that were just going through the roof. And we began to take apart in a mock-up some of these crockets, and a lot of them, which looked fine before we took them out, we realized they were held together, or not held together, but the cracks were masked over by putty and then painted over. So what you see is a perfectly solid looking surface. This is another mock-up where someone actually went inside the columns, and this is the only way that we can actually get the work done. No, so this, they put in a ladder, and he started work here, and that's him on the other column. And this is it after we had to paint some of the columns. I've mostly talked about the material, and I just like to touch on its sustainability. We live, this basilica is in one of the poorest areas of Manila, and there are also many students. And so we've done outdoor concerts, merchandise, small bits of merchandise. We hold choral concerts, and we try to get out there to let people know about the work we were doing, to build, essentially to build a brand so that funding would come in. We also tried to get the communities involved by giving tours, and it's always heartening and surprising to see who comes, who are interested, and as you see from this photo, almost everybody is. In Quiapo, there is a church called Quiapo Church, and it has a huge following. That is probably the largest Catholic festival. Ago, we had 13 million people come, and unfortunately, that's not our following. It's for Quiapo Church. However, that group passes in front of the basilica, and the friars had the idea of bringing out the Virgin to meet the Black Nazarene, the Christ Jesus, which gets paraded throughout the streets. And there is a time where she's brought out and a prayer happens. And this was widely covered and is now part of a decades-old tradition. And so now the basilica has been integrated into this intangible heritage that's so much a part of our culture. I just like to say that in the last 8 years, there was always a space for discussion that it was difficult to bridge. Here, let me move this. On the one hand, from the view of the managers, the friars, the parish priest who has 3 years to do his job, he comes into the parish and then makes plans for 3 years. As we know, the preservation of buildings is a long-term view, and we had to bridge the two, that this is going to go beyond your term. A lot of them also thought that the project cost was not warranted, and the discussion was trying to veer towards, but this needs long-term investment. And so many people also, the donors primarily, have donated to the project, and they believe that it does need long-term investment. Another one was that the church is about people. And yes, it is. And there's this incredible need to participate and create in the church. However, there must be a controlled space, and it's not always at the liberty of each parish priest to create on a blank slate. And so that discussion is still ongoing. The church's structure has been home to the Virgin and is a point of pride of the order. So what about these features is open to discussion and creation and negotiation? There has to be a space for creativity and use of the church to meet new needs. So what parts of this project do they fall under? It's also looking at it as a sacred site, and it's also a cultural site. On the one hand, there's the need to create and planned and controlled growth. This is a local parish, and the parish is also national cultural patrimony. And bridging that in between here is conservation management plan and discussions ongoing. Right now, there's a new executive director who has a background in heritage management. Her name is Claire Vitug, and she at some point wanted to become a nun. So I think that makes her particularly suited to this project. I guess I'm over time, and with this, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Tina. It's very interesting and incredible, touching. Actually, I've been there, I think, the church 3 times within this a decade of my life. And the first time I went there, I remember I think it's around 2011. That's before the the restoration project started. And I went with my colleagues, and we were like thought that this church is really amazing, like how it was built, and we also wondering at that time, like because we can also already saw the sign of the deterioration of the metal, and we were wondering how you're going to restore and make a repair for the church. But just after a few years that we heard about the project that you started, and we are very pleased that at least this church will be saved for the far future. I have a quick question before we go back to all speakers. Your presentation is really comprehensive. I just would like to know, because the metal building is really rare. As you mentioned, it's only one in the Philippines, but I even thought it's the only one in Southeast Asia. We don't actually have that. So when you're going to do a restoration, how do you find the conservator or people who experience in doing a metal conservation? Because I think it's the only one, but it's quite interesting, because if we don't have the old buildings built from metal, but we have the more recent building built from metal, or at least part of the buildings made from metal, and we can learn from your project as well, like how you start doing that.
The answer is, how do we do it? We do it very slowly. And we're finding, I think right now we have the right team. It takes a whole village, really, to look at it from various perspectives, not just the structural or the architectural, but also from the material itself. If you're replacing it with a structural bolt, how will this bolt weather over time? And is it as good as the original material? You know, we did a lot of tests on this, and it seems like a really slow corroding metal. Even our metallurgists who took a look at the data were floored that they had this technology at the time. There were trace elements of vanadium and copper and very low carbon. And they thought, what technology did they use? And given that it has been corroding on and off for the last maybe 100 years in the same spaces, and it's still standing, is a testament to the materials and the resiliency of it, because it's been rusting in the same places undetected over 100 years. So how do we do it? Very slowly. We've reached out to some similar all-metal churches. A lot of them are in South America. And priest to priest, one of our friars had reached out to them, and they said, we didn't know what to do with this. And so we just repainted the whole thing. We scraped all of the rust and just repainted it, and because there was a lot of decorative material on the inside.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very difficult, but I think many people can learn from your case studies. And in my understanding, it's still like an ongoing conservation project, right? You still need to do like a more research and more experimental conservation method for like because today we haven't talked about the artworks much. I think we may have some opportunity in the future to go back to you and focusing on like the art restoration, particularly for like the decorative painting, that kind of thing in the future. So, okay, I think we have about, please. Yeah.
Now I think we're mostly done with the diagnostics and all the testing, and now designing repairs for the building for various components. And so where there's almost every place where there's damage is unique. So all of the detailing will have to be tailored to this one unit times how many hundreds of areas. So
yeah, and I hope you good luck with that. I'm sure. So coming back to our speakers, we have a question from our attendees from Zoom. I think the questions can be for all of you. I think from your perspective, your opinion, what lessons can we learn from these case studies and new normals they generated that we can apply to today's context? So actually, let me explain more. I think it's like a question that I had when I started thinking about this stage, like from the case studies that we have today, the 3 case studies. Actually, when we design this talk, we're starting from a very wider perspective of the new normals, like in the for the first case that Siripoj made, it's like, it's not so specific for any material fabrics, but it's like a wider culture, a cultural change at that period to the urban change for Sasathon case studies. And for Thainess, your case study is like more fabric, more detail in the adaptation. So what we learned from these 3 case studies, how can we apply, or how can we make use to present day context? Perhaps I start from going back to Tina, and then Sasathon and Siripoj.
Okay. What can you learn? You know, when we were trying to diagnose this building, and the structural engineers were saying, this is amazing, it's so much stronger than it needed to be to stand. So thankfully, it withstood all of this corrosion and eaten metal parts because it was originally constructed to be so strong and withstand earthquakes. However, it seems like its designer was thinking earthquake, earthquake, earthquake. And no one was thinking about water. And it's water that is now taking this down. So what do I learn from the past is everything is multidisciplinary. When you do something, there's a broad range of how it will affect things, and try and really take that full spectrum before intervening in something or doing anything.
Thank you, Sasathon. Sasathon.
Okay, hi. Hello.
Okay. We hear you.
Okay. Yeah, for my case, what we have learned from the past in 1665 and 1666 cases, the important thing is the thing that I can see is the king has issued the orders to control and eliminate the plague, and try to control the society together, because by that time people just start to panic and like do their own things. I'm gonna do my own things, you're gonna do your own things. However, those things gonna only make things worse. So what I've learned from that, same as modern times, when the government or the bodies, official bodies have issues some kind of advice and everything, we should listen and try to comply to it. I mean, I know it's against a lot of human nature, like how dare you telling me what to do. But in this kind of situation, we need everyone to unite and work together in the same harmony, just to keep just to control the disease. And if one person do something out of order, it could cause the rest of the world or the rest of the society to be in total catastrophe. So it's just like when we work together, we unite, we listen, and we follow the advice, it will be best to keep the kind of disease and everything's away and try to reduce the impact of what else, the worst thing that could happen to your society. So that's what I've learned about it. I think that, can you still hear me?
Thank you, Sasathorn. So we come back to Siripoj. Actually, I would like to just like address what you conclude at your video presentation, that you at the end you point out that for the case of the Black Death in Ayutthaya period, the Thainess is like a new normal that emerged from that occurrence. So what we have learned from that, Siripoj?
For back then, I think it different from the COVID-19 situation. For the COVID-19 situation, I think the epidemic affect to everyone, and it affect the structure of society. But every society in the past has had a different condition. I think maybe we cannot compare about the back then in Ayutthaya to the COVID-19. It's very short, very short answer, but I think it's very different.
Yeah, actually, I agree. That's why we think why we don't know what will be the new normals from COVID-19 virus. We just looking back at our history to see how it can be developed and evolved. But we will take like a longer time to see the real new normals. I don't know in the near or in the far future. We still have some questions from our attendee from Facebook. Yeah. Okay. I think this question is perhaps for you, Tina. The questions. Okay. Is how does I think it's about the present situation happen around San Sebastian Basilica. How does the construction of the nearby condominium affect the ongoing conservation for San Sebastian Church?
Sorry, that's really a question for the executive director who's working with engineers right now. But we've done various tests on the building to monitor vibrations. There were 2 types of tests, and that was factored into a finite element analysis, a structural 3D model. And what we found was the greatest vibrations. This was before construction started. Was that the greatest vibrations were actually caused by the tolling of the bells. And think of it, they're on the top of the spire, and that sorry, let me start. They're on the top of the spire, and when that tolls, that kind of causes vibration from top to bottom. And I was asking the engineers, so you're monitoring the vibrations from 100 meters away. Can we just say that if the vibrations there are less, than that of the bells, which have been tolling 3 times a day for 127 years, then we're okay. And he said that it's hard to say that because that kind of vibration is constant and it's quick and it's strong, and we don't know what the impact is. So I think right now they're monitoring the vibrations. So impact, we don't know yet.
Yeah, I think thank you thank you for your clarification. Actually, I think now in many countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, we also confronting this type of development projects around our own cities. So I think this is something that in the future, SPAFA also going to focus on a kind of heritage impact assessment, which may be able to mitigate the impacts from human-induced activity like this to our heritage. So I think before I announce the name of the winners, to get our again, I have to show SPAFA back here. Yeah, I think we have learned a lot. Actually, the three speakers already give their opinions on from their own research, what they think about how we learn from the case study of the disaster in the history. I think there are also some other point that I would like to add, like from what Siripoj addressed about the spreading of the plague in 14th century, which is similar to the present pandemic in terms of the spreading. I think this intensifies the character of disaster that we have been talking, that any disaster are borderless. Actually, as he also mentioned, the spread from China to Central Asia to Europe. So come back to the present day, if the coronavirus still explode wherever in the world, I think we are still at risk. Now we are protecting our own countries, but finally I think we have to protect the whole world together, or it can explode anywhere, anytime, and we all have to come back to the second wave, the third wave, and we don't know how it's going to finish. On the other hand, Sasathon also point out the interesting issues on the impact of disaster, which sometimes we may not clearly see from our angle, like when she mentioned about the effect from plague, which actually is not really directly make the city change immediately, but it's like a kind of the consequences from the outbreak that make the city deserted. And then when the fire happened in London, it's like an opportunity for the city to be rebuilt and reshaped for so it become the city that we have seen nowadays. And for the last case study, I think we can really see the extreme human creativity and innovation driven from the beliefs that we really need to survive from earthquake. So as we can see the attempt of people who try to build San Sebastian Church for the 5th time, and it can stand until nowadays. And I think it's really incredible. And there are some other point that I think we can think furthermore, like the sustainability for many aspects, for the importance of the church itself for the community, and for the sustainability of the materials. When we make compatible materials to replace the local ones, how long it can be last, and when we need to do a restoration or the repair, how we going to ensure that we can find a way to sustain the heritage. So I think today we have a lot, and I think it's time that I think some attendees are waiting for, as we already announced, that if anyone stay with us until the end of the session, they will be randomly given a souvenir from SPAFA. So we have the winners from Facebook, Jeda, San, and Andre. So, and from Zoom, we John Paul Yasana. You both are the lucky winners for us today. So we will contact you shortly personally. So I have to thank you, Siripoj, Saston, and your colleagues at the Museum of London Archaeology and Tina for today's session. And thank you to all our viewers for making time to join us and for sending in your comments and questions. Before we finish today, please be also reminded that we will be posting an evaluation form based on today's session, and would appreciate if you could complete the evaluation to help us improve future SPAFA sessions. And I also have the other point. So next SPAFA session will be titled Textile Preservation, Indigenous Knowledge and Methods, to be held on 12 November next month. In that session, we will collaborate with UCLA. So if you don't want to miss out on future SPAFA session, please liking and following us on our Facebook and sign up for our newsletter. We post a summary and the recording of each session on our website as well at www.cmo-spafa.org. And you can also find recordings of our previous sessions along the numerous other videos related to Southeast Asia's archaeology, arts, and culture on our YouTube channel. So stay safe and healthy until we can meet again physically. Goodbye.